Welcome. Thank you for coming out on a Friday morning near the end of a semester. You know, fellow faculty, we all know how busy it gets at the end of a semester, and we appreciate your attendance here and engagement. I'm Robert Lang. I'm director of both Brookings Mountain West and the Lindsay Institute here at UNLV. And we have a full day. We have Lindsay, Brookings content. We have folks who are doing research with us. We have our own scholars who are presenting on findings that we have. We're enthusiastic about the amount of product we've gotten out. We also are enthusiastic that we think we're having impact in community, and we'll describe how. So first Brookings, second Lindsay, and then at the end of the day, which is, by the way, just noon, so don't freak out. Feel like end of the day. It's Friday. The end of the day is midday on Friday. At the end of the conference or symposium, however you want to term this event, we'll have a founders panel where Neil Smastrick, who's sitting right there, and Brian Greenspun and Lindy Schumacher will talk about the origins of Brookings. And we also have Bill Antholis from Brookings in Washington, D.C., who's the managing director, to talk about his engagement with us and Brookings' engagement writ large and other communities that are now envious of the capacity that we have here in Las Vegas, and which is a good thing because, you know, in a lot of ways, Las Vegas is not the envy of some of our local peer cities, let's say, although I think they should be. I think we're underrated. So I will start by introducing Neil Smastrick. Please come up and make a few comments. Thanks.
Thanks, Rob. And I just want to say welcome. I'm glad that some folks have come here because it's time for us to reflect a little bit on what the Brookings Institution and the Lindsay Institute have done for us. I just want to say, in way of setting this up, that I feel in the community there's a group of people who really get it, who understand what Brookings has brought to the table and understand what this activity has done for Las Vegas. And then there's a group of people, both on campus and off campus, who haven't quite figured it out yet. And this, I think, meeting will help us to summarize and check off some of the things that we were hoping for when we began, and we'll be discussing those in the Founders Panel. And I'm just sorry that Bill, who was definitely a partner in crime here when we were getting this thing off the ground, won't be here for that discussion. He has a prior appointment. But so I want to publicly say while he's here that the relationship Bill Antholis and I developed almost instantly when this was starting was actually one of the critical pieces of the puzzle, and I think the comfort that we both felt with each other and the commitments that we made were absolutely critical to launch both of these activities. Now, in way of setting up what we're going to be talking about today, in about 3.5 short years since the formal launch of Brookings and Lindsay, so much has happened that is changing the face of Nevada, and the face needed to change. But when we first started thinking about getting this program here, I remember I was provost initially and then transitioned into the presidency just about the time we got everything rolling. And as provost, I met with all the deans, and some of the deans who I met with are in the room today, and some of the other folks who helped with this are in the room. And I said something to the effect of, all right, we've got this really big thing going, guys, and it's huge. It's the intellectual equivalent of Las Vegas stealing the Dallas Cowboys, because I like the sports analogy. We're going to try to get Brookings to move out here, and they're not affiliated like this with any other institution in the country. And if anybody needs inside the Beltway expertise, if anybody can use a great national view that places what we're doing here in context, if any place needs the help of the deep data and expertise that the oldest, most prestigious think tank in the world can offer, it's the Brookings Institution. And the Brookings Mountain West, which was born out of efforts of Rob and Mark Moreau, and those at Brookings who backed it out of the Metro Division came here, and the rest, as we say, is history. So today, you're going to get a brief review, an update, the Cliff Notes version of the kinds of things that we've put in play and where we think we'll be heading, and how we have not only enriched through Brookings our ability to think of ourselves on both a regional and global level, but we are also going to talk about how, through the connection between Brookings and the Lindsay Institute, we are turning thought into action to make this region better in very, very concrete ways. So, without further ado, I'd like to ask Bill Antholis, again, one of the heroes of this story, who is, in essence, the provost of Brookings. Strobe gets all the, the glam jobs and gets to go to the fancy English societies in the summertime and meet with his people. But Bill is the one who keeps his nose to the grindstone and is in the business now of planning the 100th anniversary of Brookings, which will occur in 2016, something that I hope we'll all be able to celebrate with you, Bill. So without further ado, Bill Antholis.
Thank you, Neil. Well, it really is a pleasure to be back. I'm usually here 4 or 5 times a year, and running around campus, running around the rest of the city, meeting a lot of stakeholders, and it has really been a joy of the last going on 5 years that we've been thinking and planning about how to do this and how to do it well. To give you a minute of background on Brookings, and then answering the question, why are we here and where do we see this going? As Neil said, we turn 100 in 2016. We've got 5 research programs that built gradually over that time. The first one was governance studies, which is really the health and effectiveness of American political institutions. Woodrow Wilson saw the U.S. government as not ready to fight World War I as he was approaching it. And he asked a St. Louis businessman, a Republican named Robert Brookings, who was among other things, a clothespin manufacturer, but he was sort of the Jack Welch of his era. He understood how you manage private institutions. And Woodrow Wilson wanted him to come to Washington to teach how to manage the government. And that was our governmental, what became governmental studies and now is governance studies. We then added economic studies because managing the government ended up becoming an getting into economic policy, how you spend government money. And economic studies at the end of World War II designed the Marshall Plan. Congress literally wrote a letter to Brookings saying, can you help us design this thing? And we realized maybe we should have a foreign policy studies program. So that was built 50 years ago. And then in the last 10 years since Strobe's been president and I've been the managing director, we've added 2 new programs, the Metropolitan Program and a Global Economy Program. So we are local, national, global, economic, and political. And I wanted to give you that background because when we came here and accepted, it's fitting that we're meeting today in Greenspun Hall. My first meeting with Neil was meeting with Neil and Brian Greenspun out in Green Valley over pancakes, if I remember correctly. And we started to talk about what it would be like to come here. And it was a really exciting thought because we hadn't done it before. And as we talked about it, we had been here in Vegas before at a board meeting in 2007, largely because of our Metropolitan Program, which was looking at the Mountain West and how quickly it was growing and the challenges it was facing. And we saw at the time that there were imbalances in the growth. So when the music stopped and the growth stopped, the imbalances became really apparent and obvious. And Neil came to us and said, in some ways, in some very important ways, you know us as well as, if not better than we know ourselves. Teach us how to do what you've sketched out in the blueprint. And as we talked about what that meant, we realized that it was much bigger than just a metro thing, that this is a global city with a global reputation and global contacts, playing on some really important national issues, not just because the Senate Majority Leader happens to call this home, but because the big issues that the country is facing, from energy to immigration to education and healthcare, are all happening here in the same way. And so as we tried to design what we wanted to do, we wanted to get at those things. And so that's what we've really built over the last 4 or so years, and where we want to build and deepen going forward. Why do people from Brookings like coming out here? They love coming out here, by the way, from all 5 research programs. And it's not because of the things that happen a mile and a half to the west of here, though a few people enjoy that as well. Many people stay at the Hyatt Place or whatever and never even make it to the Strip. They like coming out here because of the deep roots that they're starting to establish with people here at UNLV. I can just say that for us, this really was about getting outside the Beltway, but we didn't realize that by parachuting into a place and spending a few weeks on campus every year, we would build lasting ties. And so I just wanted to give a quick shout out to some of the people, and I'm sure I'm going to be leaving people off this list, but it starts, of course, with Rob and Bill. You know, when Neil and I sat down to sketch this out, we said, well, we really need somebody who anchors the thing. And I had in my mind Rob Lang, who joined us at the board meeting in 2007 and left us with the phrase, you know, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas at 3 in the morning, but what happens in Vegas at 3 in the afternoon changes the world. And that married up with the global vision that we have at Brookings. Convening is a big part of what we do. And seeing the Vegas convening asset was really critical for helping us understand what we could accomplish here. But we also said, Neil and I agreed, that we needed somebody who would get into the wiring and mechanics, but also had the same vision and could communicate with scholars, with other stakeholders. And that's been Bill Brown. And people at Brookings view Rob and Bill as part of our family back at home. And so that's obviously the first shout out. A special thanks to Ron Smith in memoriam. I mean, Ron was a real big part of designing this. And you know, his absence is felt. But thanks to Tom Piota, it's been a very seamless transition because of our work in energy. Tom was part of that. Energy and natural resources, Tom was part of that at the beginning. And then the scholars who have really anchored the engagement. And here I know I'm going to leave a few people out, but I wanted to start with people teaching in the Brookings curriculum. Because when people from Brookings come out here, you know, we have this thing that we're debating all the time. Where does innovation come from? Is it a single mind? Is it Steve Jobs? Or is it a community of people? And at Brookings, since people are very focused on their own work, you might think that they answer the great mind, but I think we've come to understand the Yogi Berra approach. When you come to a fork in the road, take it. It's both. It is both the great scholars and the idea of establishing connections and innovating in space. But then there's also institutions, things that last. And so we see this place as an institution built around the partners that we've had. You know, Brad Wimmer in economics, David Damore and John Tooman in political science, Dennis Pareges in, as we think of it, foreign policy, but teaching the international relations course here. Bernie Malmud teaching the global economy course. Rob teaches the Metro course. And people like Helen Neal, who have been research partners for our scholars back at home. And there are a number of emerging others, including graduate students and undergraduates who are starting to make connections with our folks. So that's why we're here. We're here to make those connections, to deepen them, and then to institutionalize them. So I think I've probably gone over my 5 minutes, but I hope you sense the enthusiasm that everybody at Brookings feels. We are here for the long haul. Rob suggested that I mention that other universities have come knocking, and we're open to those conversations, but you've set a bar for success, particularly with our scholars on whom everything rests at Brookings. You know, as Neil mentioned, Strobe and I sort of do the president provost trick, but top down does not work at a place like Brookings. It's because, you know, our scholars are our brain trust. And if they're excited about something, we do something with them. And we're not going to go anyplace else unless we can establish the same level of connection and level of comfort that we have here. And by going someplace else, we're not going to abandon this. This is something that we want to institutionalize, potentially endow. We have a campaign. I'm sure you'll have a campaign at some point in the future. We want to be here for the long term. So thanks. And again, my apologies for not being able to stay. In addition to this one other meeting, this is Greek Easter weekend, so I have to get home for Good Friday services to the East Coast, so I'm on the noon flight.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Bill. You know, I didn't realize how connected Washington was to Las Vegas until I got out here. I knew intuitively that D.C. is the center of national trade associations. So it's not just government, you know, and again, this is sort of irks some folks that everyone who lobbies the government the home builders, you name it, all set up shop in DC. And we're the leading venue for the trade shows. So virtually everybody in DC who's engaged in all these key sectors, consumer electronics, for example, which is in Arlington, the home builders I mentioned in DC, the realtors, everyone, medical, you name the sector, all make it out here. And they've all made it out to my house, apparently, because it turns out I knew a ton of people in the national trade associations and was a member of a bunch of national trade associations. So we are connected in that DC is the leading space where knowledge is produced in trade world and in national association world, even government associations like NACO for the counties or the U.S. Conference of Mayors. And then they come out here. The U.S. Conference of Mayors are actually going to be at Mandalay Bay in June. The first time they actually meet in a place that is not an incorporated city. I have to tell them that, by the way. That's part of my little talk to them. So we're going to go over who we are and what we do, but we're mostly going to do what we do rather than who we are because we're engaged in all kinds of activity. These are the goals and objectives, but the truth is what really started in this whole process was a very deep audit of the state and where the state is missing assets, its relationship with Washington, the relationship between Las Vegas and Carson City, the relationship between Las Vegas and peer cities in the West as both competition and opportunity. So we've taken on this project, and it's been a little bit of a journey because there's a good deal of complexity to it. There's a lot of ways that the region's succeeding. There's a lot of ways it's in deep deficit. And starting with, and Bill mentioned this, Mark Muro and I, in the middle of the last decade, wanted to do a project on large-scale metropolitan growth in the West. And what we realized from work that we had been doing already, I had published a book, actually I always like props. Mark helped me publish this book, Boom Burbs, which was about large, fast-growing suburbs, and it was focused on places like Phoenix and Denver and Las Vegas. And one of the stories told out of this book is North Las Vegas, predicting that North Las Vegas would run into deep, deep trouble if the growth engine ever stopped. And I get quoted on that a bit, in the media, which is, I didn't intend to be a doomsayer on it, but it was obvious to people who were paying attention that there was some stresses to the system, let's just say, and that this city and these cities, plural in the West, were chasing this sort of growth genie, and if they went off the edge economically, they'd go off the cliff as well. They were also dramatic underinvestment, except for a place like Denver in human capital. And the most notable was Las Vegas. And in fact, this is the largest state in the US that does not have a Carnegie Research Very High institution. And that comes out immediately in this piece. It didn't have the research capacity. The research capacity for the state, entire state, is exceeded by single other institutions in neighboring states, let alone the East. And so this was worrisome in that the innovative capacity of this state was weaker than other comparable places. And we were a bit concerned. These are the areas that we looked at. And so the basis of Brookings Mountain West is these large regions. And something interesting happened. You see these spaces like the Front Range, the Wasatch Front, Greater Las Vegas, Northern New Mexico, and the Sun Corridor are bigger than the metropolitan areas that were then the formal MSAs. But this is what's happened. This year, the Office of Management and Budget, who does the geography, says that Las Vegas is now that space. Because you'll see that it reaches into Arizona. Mojave County, Arizona, which has 200,000 residents, is in a commuting relationship with Las Vegas in what's called a combined statistical area. And here's the good news. The Interstate 11 project that we're pushing to connect to Phoenix, that's the road to our commuters. And that gives you priority in Washington. In other words, DC's trip that it's trying to help regions build for is the so-called money trip, which is the commute to work. And we've just picked up 200,000 folks in a neighboring county, which is about half the size of, let's say, Washoe County, not an inconsequential space. And they're now in our metro so that the Interstate 11 project is not just inter-metropolitan, but intra-combined statistical area. And thus it could be sold on two grounds. So this geography was important. Interestingly, only the Sun Corridor is not the exact geography that we explained right there, or that we predicted, because the Wasatch Front from Provo all the way up to Ogden is in a combined statistical area. The whole Front Range of the Rockies, and missing from that is Colorado Springs. The whole complex around northern New Mexico through Santa Fe, only the Sun Corridor, and the Sun Corridor is close. So the geography spelled out in 2008 in that Brookings publication predicted 4 of the 5 geographic units of integration that by 2013 the US government would say officially exist. So, and Mark and I are thrilled with this. You know, I called Mark and he's like, we were just like phoning that in. I was like, no, we were looking at the commuting patterns between the counties and figuring that if they kept going, they would wind up there. He's like, yeah, I know, I'm just giving you a hard time. Because I can't believe we got 4 of the 5 right. And the one we really had the most confidence in, ironically, of course, was the Sun Corridor, where I had spent 6 months working on a project with ASU on the Sun Corridor. The good news is that there's another geography, too, that's even bigger in the Southwest. And that's Southern California, Las Vegas, Sun Corridor complex is the 2nd largest people settlement in the US after the Northeast. So Las Vegas isn't just a big city at just over 2 million, and it's now 2,250,000 residents because of the combined statistical area, on track to go to about really 4 million by mid-century. It's actually grown 50,000 in just Clark County in the last 2 years. In our worst recession from 2010 to 2012, the most recent data, we added the equivalent in Clark of all of Carson City, which interestingly is losing population. So the Southwest as a connection, meaning all the, the sort of global connects to Asia and Latin America, and the fact that both Las Vegas and Phoenix's airports are connected by approximately, in one case, literally 1/3 of the flights originating in Phoenix wind up in Southern California airports. So we are connected through infrastructure, through opportunity, and through ports, and through logistics, and through the fact that Switch Communications, which is a leading tech firm here, is really a bunch of Californians who decided to commute to Las Vegas, and a big share of their senior management actually just fly back and forth between the 2 regions. So this is one of the areas of opportunity we're going to look at, which is Las Vegas not only is not isolated, not only is it large scale on its own, but it's in the 2nd largest complex and the leading integration point to Asian markets, and you can see it already. Las Vegas is deeply engaged in investment in Asia, and Asians now, Malaysians and Europeans, are deeply engaged in investment in us. The true global city is one where you are both an exporter of talent and management to other regions of the world, and then other regions in the world find you as a vehicle for investment in return. And we're balanced in that way. So we've got Dubai World and Deutsche Bank and Genting coming from abroad, and then we are in Asia and Singapore and expanding to other parts of the world as well. In fact, the health of 4 of our 5 Fortune 500 companies reported pretty good sales, pretty strong growth. A lot of that was China. China is actually lifting Las Vegas. And the common view, of course, has been, oh my God, China's taken all of our business. It's not taking our business if it's our business. That's the irony here. It's that, if you're the manager of that facility and the investor in that facility, and your management and your investors are the beneficiaries of it, and you reside here and you return that cash, then that repatriation of wealth accumulates to this region. In fact, Las Vegas and this state were 3rd in export growth. A lot of that represented by the importation of Asian capital back to us through that process, and just foreign visitors. And our airport is globally connected. And so the interesting thing is how much Southern California is connected to the world. And as a backup, Las Vegas and Phoenix are, through those connections and through our own global connections, part of that complex. And that's our opportunity for growth going forward. Now I want to turn this over to Bill, who's going to go through some of the programmatic development, and then I'll talk some more product in a moment.
Thank you, sir. Good morning. Thanks again for coming. Just take a point of personal privilege, and I'd like to thank President Smatrisk and Bill Antholis and Rob for the opportunity to be involved with Brookings Mountain West. It's to say it's been interesting will be an understatement. And maybe I'll leave it at that and let you judge from the rest of what you hear today. Wanted to talk about the Brookings Scholars, since that's one of the key aspects of our program. And as Bill mentioned, we bring out our Brookings colleagues from Brookings' 5 programs. They're out here throughout the academic year. There, as Bill mentioned, it's gotten quite popular at Brookings. One of the toughest assignments we have is selecting who to bring out from Brookings, both from the multiple applications we get and trying to balance bringing out people who've established relationships with many of you in this room, and with our business community, with our local state government leaders, with our community partners, and also taking advantage and bringing new people out from Brookings who haven't been here yet to see how they'll interact, where their connections will be. But we bring them out from these 5 programs. We brought out something like 48 different scholars thus far, so we are working our way through Brookings, and they keep bringing us new people, and I'm proud to report that, as I do with every annual report, haven't had to bail anyone out of any local facility yet. From my point of view, they actually behave themselves too well, but they're starting to get a good feel for Las Vegas and UNLV, and I hope you'll agree with me on that. As we mentioned, they're invited by UNLV faculty to teach, give a guest lecture in a course. They'll meet one-on-one with faculty. Any of you who think you might have an interest and want to explore a collaboration, we set up one-on-one meetings. A number of departments have set up sort of ad hoc seminars and colloquia to give Brookings Scholars a chance to just chat with faculty as a group, with graduate students as a group. We're open to any and all meetings and collaborations. If you think we should be introducing a Brookings Scholar to someone or some group on campus, off campus, an individual, please do. There's no one template for what makes a good Brookings Scholar from our point of view. Some scholars are quite intensive on campus, as I mentioned, with their teaching and collaborations with faculty. Others spend a great deal of their time off campus because they're interested in energy issues and they're out at meeting with solar people and other energy folks. They might be exploring IT issues and gaming issues. It runs the gamut of policy issues. So each one has a different dynamic, and we want to do what works. So I'm here saying, please let me know if you personally have any interest, or through any of your colleagues. Let's explore any and all options, and you'll hear more about those from some of our faculty colleagues later, so I don't want to take up too much time there. One of the things that we ask Brookings Scholars to do are give public lectures right in this room. In fact, it's appropriate they do it in Greenspun Hall and in this great facility, thanks to Brian Greenspun's relationship with Brookings. They give lectures which we record, are up on our website, as are all our products. They get assigned, those lectures are obviously, sometimes classes are assigned and come to the lectures. They're able to be assigned afterwards. All these materials are cataloged and made accessible through the university and its library, so they are downloaded on a daily basis. It's very exciting to see. Another aspect of our community outreach are, as you might imagine, our Brookings Scholars. Local and regional media are very interested in what they have to say about Las Vegas, Nevada, the region. They're often on KNPR, but they're also often articles in local media, UNLV, TV and radio. We're happy to make them available. Our Brookings Scholars are here for us, if you will. So again, at the urge of sense of being redundant, any way that you can help me make them more accessible and integrated in the community would be welcome. Of course, a lot of what we do on the policy side, we're trying to reach the community, and you do that through media, obviously. So we're, both our scholars and Rob and I and our university colleagues, we've been the subject of or quoted in almost 250 media stories since we've started here. A lot of local media, of course, and regional, but as you can imagine, USA Today, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, everybody wants to know what's going on in Las Vegas. And sometimes they want to know policy issues that are going on in Las Vegas. So we cover both of those. We produce a lot, we think, and we're trying to produce a lot, but we want it to be accurate, we want it to be analytical, we want it to influence the policy discussions, whether it's the senior policymakers in business or government, or community leaders, or frankly, just the community as a whole. We want, whatever your policy discussions are, we want you to be using accurate data. So you'll find on our website all our products. One of the most important ones, I would argue, is the Mountain Monitor, which is a quarterly product we produce, and it is what it says it is. It tracks the economic recession and now recovery, we can say. The first issues, the first couple years were always tough to write. There wasn't a lot of good news there, as you heard. You know, don't have to tell anyone in this room, we were ground zero for the recession, thanks to construction problems and foreclosures. But thanks to Brookings' expertise, we track the economic recovery and growth in the major metropolitan areas, and it's been incredibly well received both locally and regionally, and is a go-to source for the media. So every quarter when we publish that report, we get inquiries and are on local and sometimes national media sources. We also do sort of ad hoc publications, and for that, many of you in this room should consider talking to us, and we'd like to talk to you. We do local and regional reports. We try and tap experts, right? And we've started working with colleagues in Arizona, Utah, and UNLV, and you'll hear more about some of their work shortly. And now, against my better judgment, I'm going to hand the clicker back to Rob. I may never see this again.
No. It's like Al Haig. I'm in charge here. Remember that? You remember that line? Thanks, Bill. Nice summary. So the reason we put up the Nevada Vision Stakeholders Group, I got here, I think, January 3rd, 2010. January 8th, 2010, I was running the Nevada Vision Stakeholders Group. And, you know, you can imagine some of the conservative media and the conspiracy theories. I didn't have time for a conspiracy. I was sleeping on an air mattress, I told them. You know, but they were insistent, I'm sure, that the air mattress was somehow beamed in from another planet. And what's interesting about this particular project is it happens, and I get here, and Bill mentioned this, it's, you know, the teeth of the Great Recession. And Senator Horsford, now Congressman Horsford, has organized this committee. And what he's after is the first audit. He's after benchmarks. Where are we failing? What would be targetable, reasonable goals for progress that you could benchmark? And the real reason that I was the chair, I was non-voting chair, is that Moody's, the contractor, looked like they might not deliver a product. And in fact, they failed to deliver a fiscal audit of the state that they were supposed to as well. And so I had to sort of lean on Moody's. Moody's is good if you get them to work, you know, but at first they had some local guy who was this sort of stringer in the media. They refer to as stringer as a person that's sort of in a locality that's working for them. The guy shows up the first day, and he's a sort of solid UNR grad, and he says, "We got the Fremont Cannon." And the Southerners, and they were mostly Southerners on this because it represented roughly proportionate population in the state, said to me, "Step one, Rob, is you got to get the UNR guy off the stakeholders committee." But all seriousness aside, and that was my first encounter with the UNR folk, you know, of what would become many. What we really were after is critical areas: education, healthcare, transportation, economic development, and that was principally the concern. Jobs, because of the depth of the recession, what had been, you know, out of balance and out of whack. And the good news is, Moody's did very solid work, and the baseline data from this report has been used again and again by us. So we drew it into, I'll get to in a moment, we do the state economic development plan. We drew it into the state economic development plan as well. So we took the effort to, you know, recycle this because it was actually great. It was longitudinal data. It was comparative data because they looked at benchmark cities that we should have been performing well against. And we also undertook a project where we looked at demographics, political geography, and argued that this region that we're in is really America's next swing region, and a kind of new American heartland. You know, we like to tell the tale that Peoria Arizona is bigger than Peoria, Illinois. And there's that old expression, will it play in Peoria? Which meant at a vaudeville, will a product that starts in New York have enough middle class and middle taste appeal to make it in the rest of America? Well, now that question would be more appropriate to ask in a political sense in a place like Peoria, Arizona, in a state like Arizona, which is about to become a swing state as we predict. One of the reasons we're interested in this too is that swing states, and Brookings, John Hudak, gave a lecture in this very space, said tend to do better with the federal government. Now I say tend to do better because guess which state's an outlier? Guess which state performs worse than Puerto Rico? Puerto Rico has no House and Senate members and has no electoral votes, but literally gets more aid per person than we do. And we are in a position where, with a Senate Majority Leader and with a swing state, to perform well. And the interesting thing is it's not the fault of the congressional delegation in Washington. They've actually done a decent job of hooking us up with nice earmarks like that nice big tower for $99 million that's going up at the airport. The problem is the state is super cheap, and it doesn't match the federal government on all kinds of programmatic investment. And we found that out. Moody's, interestingly, said to me, we don't know how to do a fiscal audit for you because you're the state that's not doing the fiscal audit that the other states are doing. And I said, what are the other states doing? They're having us go through their books and they ask this question. If we cut this program, do we lose federal money? So if it's, diabetes for children, apparently the federal government cared. If it was diabetes for adult, they didn't. If you had adult diabetes, you're on your own, kid. But if you were, a child, they kept it because it induced federal spending. And so Moody's was literally going line by line through the budgets of these other states and providing counsel back to them about $1 cut here, you lose $3. $1 cut in state, in this case, you just lose the state share. So if you want to cut over there. We were like every other states were like a scalpel. We were like with a hatchet. And what we did is we deepened the hole that we had with Washington because we cut in categories that actually reduced the federal investment in Nevada. Some of this is this ornery Western, we're on our own. Even though this land had to be won in a war, and even though the state is a cooked-up contrivance by the Lincoln administration in 1864 to try to swing the 1864 election. That's why it's battle-born. I've had to tell people at UNR, you're blue, it's Union blue. Really? Yeah. It was a conspiracy. It was in violation of even the Northwest Ordinance's prescription of X number of white male voters, which, by the way, Utah had, but had the wrong religion. So we got bumped in and they got bumped out of the Union, if you will. And we took a lot of their land. We are part of the federal government. They built Hoover Dam. There's all these folks who are like, well, we want you to leave the federal government, leave us alone. We don't want them to pick winners. They picked us. They built Hoover Dam. That's picking a winner if I ever heard one. So we looked at this geography and determined, for example, that you even had the 3 swing states in the West, including Colorado, New Mexico, and Nevada, now have, by 2010, more electoral votes than Ohio. And Obama did not need to lean on this region the way he thought he might in the 2012 election, but there was a way you could lose Ohio and win the Electoral College, and the path went through Nevada. So we were, and anytime you get on those websites like Nate Silver, and they had all these, or the prediction models out of Princeton, Wang's prediction model, they all showed that after Ohio, the next most critical tipping point state was Nevada. But again, this has translated into nothing, not because we're not in a strategic position to exploit it, which we are, but rather that the state is so penny-wise, pound-foolish that it fails to actually look at, by category, its investments and determine where those investments would induce more federal spending. So, again, deepest recession in the history of the state, essentially, because the state does pretty well in the Great Depression because of federal projects, and it booms in previous recessions because of natural resources. And we are asked, as part of a whole team at UNLV, and Jerry Bomani's back here, and Jerry worked on this, Neil worked on this, we all worked on this, which was getting the governor, who had just been elected, and getting his staff to consider developing a specific economic development plan for the state of Nevada. And it began in January 2011, again, Sandoval's in office for like a couple of weeks. And we have a meeting with some of the folks on his team. Steve Hill, who would end up heading the governor's office of economic development, is in this meeting. Even Steve Hill, prior to this event, followed Brookings around to a few similar type events, one being in Chicago, and started to understand that we're bipartisan, that we don't have any particular axe to grind, that this is a set of best practices, that a lot of the politicians we engage around the country are in fact Republicans, that we were doing similar types of projects in places like Michigan where there was a newly elected Republican governor, and so on. And when Steve and some of the folks around the governor realized it was bipartisan, and it also offered you tools. It wasn't just, you know, a very common sort of, let's say, just constant chant from some quarters is that just don't touch it, folks. Just let it go on its own, leave it alone. Anything that promotes any form of investment, of strategic investment, ends up distorting the market. And that view is not held by the majority of Republican governors and governments and legislatures in the country, because they were developing tools where they made strategic investments based on what they perceived to be, or documented to be, their state's particular strength. We have our strengths. And that's what we were highlighting here. What other states are doing and what is our opportunity? And it was bipartisan. So you see the lieutenant governor and then the Senate Majority Leader together making this effort to say, let's resolve some of this difference that we have over budget and taxes and so on, and let's agree to a common set of investment principles for going forward. And that actually led to a much longer and deeper report. And this report is like 175 pages, but online we have about 500 pages. That was commissioned by Governor Sandoval, paid for in large part by a settlement that the Secretary of State's office had. And Brookings took its money from philanthropy. Our partner in this was SRI, the old Stanford Research International, who's partnered with Brookings on a few projects. SRI is a very high quality consultant. They are in both Arlington, Virginia, and I think Menlo Park, California. Notably, the most recent thing they did in technology is they're the ones that invented Siri for your cell phone. So we asked Siri if we should hire SRI, and it said yes. That might have been some sort of inside baseball. But SRI was very good because they had all this comparative data. They had the kind of baseline information for other states, and they had done this in other states, and they had common metrics by which we could determine where we were in deficit, where we were exceeding, you know, and of course, as soon as you start looking at this thing, tourism pops. And it's represented 4 or 5 times in the state's economy than would be predicted. And then there are places where there is very deep deficit, and the most notable one was this. And this is true not so much of the whole state, and this is true in a lot of this report. A lot of what the opportunity was in Las Vegas. Some of that was deepening and expanding even the core sector in tourism. We could do more events, which is why we need an event center, and we say that in there. We could do foodies come to town and love it, you know. We could do more ecotourism. There's lots of these little niches that are pursuable, and some of them quite large scale. You could double events. Events never actually suffered in the recession. And then there's something like healthcare. Wow. We're the largest US metro without a med school, and SRI was saying that out of the gates. We are the largest US metro where you're missing approximately 1/3 of the predicted medicine. Some of that people are foregoing. A big share of it is that we expensively import it from mostly Southern California's west side. So instead of having about 18% of the economy of Southern Nevada in the health sector, which was predicted, and the prediction is based on our wealth, our demographics, so age structure, we had about 12%. That missing percent is missing in commercial real estate, in employment, in demand for, you know, every kind of ancillary service, in direct jobs and indirect jobs. That 5% is bigger than home construction. That 5% is bigger than all construction now, or 5 or 6%. So this is substantial. So one of the quickest, you know, if you want to fix Las Vegas quickly, one of the opportunities would be, what would it take to invest in the health infrastructure to induce people who live in our region to consume the local product as opposed to importing it expensively. And it's the most expensive consumer service you could import. So it's deadly to the regional economy. It's reducing gross domestic output of the regional economy. It's killing our office space. It's, by the way, it's terribly space consumptive. All this other technology is making us shop online, threatening bricks and mortar stores. People have to go see physicians. They have to get service. They take up a lot of space when they do it. There's all kinds of health regulations that require, and it's very space. There's all these other reasons to put this in place. But the locality, the private sector, the philanthropic community, and the state have to be partners in doing this. So we advocated right then a consideration of, what would be the return on investment for a medical school investment? Because some of the reporting we got back is that people did not have confidence in this region's medicine. And they were over-consuming the adjoining region's medicine in Phoenix and Los Angeles simply on reputation. And the joke being, the best hospital in the city is McCarran Airport. And there's it takes you to Mayo, it takes you to UCLA. So we thought this was very encouraging in the longer haul, at the moment vexing, because this is the largest gap they'd ever seen. So that's one of the opportunities. And of course, jobs, jobs, jobs. Now we have ticked up a little, but we still have not recaptured the largest share of loss, which is, if you take construction out, we actually have below average unemployment in other sectors. Healthcare is below average because it's in deficit, and whoever's in the sector is hired, basically. And that's how many people were displaced from construction. We had 100,000 people displaced from construction. The loss of the value of construction as the second driver of economic growth in the region after gaming means that we have yet to recover the '07 high in gross metropolitan product. So, and by comparison, Denver and Salt Lake are ahead of where they were in the recession. Phoenix is slightly behind, but Phoenix has resilience because Phoenix makes things. Solar panels, microchips, aerospace. We need to make a few things. We don't need to be San Diego in medicine. We just need to do our medicine. Economic diversification doesn't mean the abandonment of the core industry. Economic diversification means the supplement of other sectors that are so underserved and underdeveloped right now that if you brought them to near parity with what you'd predict for the share of the economy and the size of the region, that in and of itself would constitute diversification. You know where you're seeing this? Orlando. You know what they built? A med school. You know who approved 2 med schools on one day? Jeb Bush, Republican. One in South Florida and one in Central Florida. Why? Because they did the ROI. And you'll see we're going to do that study for this region. We'll report that later. They did the ROI and they both worked. And they looked at a place like Orlando where more retirees were going than South Florida and thought if they don't buttress, the villages are there. It's like 5 Del Webb communities strung together. They realized that if they didn't fix that problem in a hurry, that region's basis for attracting, for appealing to a lot of the consumption of their housing and construction would be forfeited in the process. And so it was seen as an economic imperative, as it is here, by the way. The difference is Florida seems to make fairly bold moves, and it's not like they're a rich state, they have no income taxes. It's that they found a way, and that's what we were saying in this report. We need to find a way. We also realized that we don't have a habit of planning in the region, to say it politely. Every other comparable Western metro that we looked at, Albuquerque, Denver, and Albuquerque's far smaller than we are, Tucson even, Salt Lake City, Phoenix, they all have deeper traditions of urban planning. They have university-based urban planning. They all have something else. Every one of those regions has light rail. All the major competing airports with us, Denver, Salt Lake, Phoenix, all has light rail going to the airport. Not only do they have light rail, they have light rail going to the airport. We know better, apparently. We're geniuses. We know not to build that, because there are such lefties in places like Phoenix and Salt Lake City. So it must have been that left-wing political establishment in those cities that induced the construction of it. So this award, which comes from the Sustainability Office at HUD, substantial at $3.5 million, and it's sent through Henderson, but it's a total partnership in the region. The interesting connection to Brookings here is that Bruce Katz, who's the head of Metro, served as the transition head of housing and urban development under Obama's first term. and was instrumental in pressing for the idea of long-range regional planning that coordinates this. And the person that's in that role knows Bruce well and is part of the network, and it was nice that we had a lot of contact with her directly, because we had to say that Las Vegas was already substantially sustainable in lots of ways. We're building a lot of green buildings. We're densely packed in, even though we don't seem to benefit much from the fact that we could do walkability better than we do. There's a lot of things to fix. There's a lot of opportunity. We have relatively clean air compared to a place like Salt Lake City. We don't have a giant smelter processing the gold out of central Nevada, for example. So we said, listen, give us a chance and invest in the infrastructure of planning and give us good money on this thing. And we had to commit all kinds, this university, and faculty in this university, multiple members of the faculty of this university were instrumental in this. This was a whole group team effort with UNLV, I think, making the balance, giving the confidence to HUD that there was enough expertise and enough people stewarding this process that it would get done. And the good news here is that this thing is on a momentum on its own. I feel very confident that we're going to deliver them a good product. It puts you, get this, into the next round of making large-scale requests. After you have this planning done, you're allowed to ask for the pieces you suggest you need. So if you say, for instance, that we believe that we're the only large region in the US at high density, at our scale, lacking true transit and multimodality, then when we go to the transportation secretary, who's, by the way, the new one is just the mayor of Charlotte and loves transit, when we go to this fellow, we get to say, we went through the HUD program and we identified this, and these stakeholders identified this, and it puts you in a higher tranche. It puts you in a higher category for inducing that federal spending. So this isn't just an exercise where we sit around and twiddle our thumbs and imagine some Las Vegas that we would love to live in and yet doesn't appear before us. This is a hard process where what we're doing is identifying a set of infrastructure investments that are so necessary that we have standing with the federal government to ask for our money back from them that we've paid in taxes to be invested by these categories. And so I'm going to turn this over to Bill for a moment, and then I think I get one more shot at you guys, and then we'll do Q&A. I'm sure you're chomping at the bit.
Oh my God, thank you.
You get it back,
I can't
Bill.
believe it. I just lost a $20 bet with President Smatrisk. I never thought I'd get this back. Thank you. I just want to talk a little bit about the minor as a segue to introducing some of our faculty colleagues here who will talk about their interactions with us and Brookings. The Brookings Public Policy minor is brand new, and it's not something that was on our radar when we launched Brookings Mountain West out here. But we made the mistake of having President Smatrisk and Bill Antholis in the room together, and you never know what's going to happen there. And we were talking about how many Brookings Scholars were getting in classes, were being invited in to give guest lectures. It led these guys to brainstorm, and we took this idea to faculty. Students were starting to sort of clamor for it. And so it led us to create a minor in which UNLV faculty and Brookings Scholars collaborate on a course with both the content. It may be one Brookings Scholar working with one UNLV faculty member. Other UNLV faculty take advantage of the Brookings Scholars that we bring through in a given semester. For example, in this coming year, we'll be bringing out 17 different scholars over the course of the 2 semesters. So basically, during the academic year, somebody from Brookings is coming or going at any given point in time, sometimes multiple. It's a series of 18 credits or 6 courses. Rob teaches an intro course to public policy and Brookings and think tanks. And it couldn't work without the UNLV faculty that we have working with us, obviously, as well as the Brookings Scholars. It's a work in progress. Some faculty have taken existing courses in their departments and tweaked them. Others are looking at creating entirely new courses and putting them in the curriculum. The students have really responded well. You can imagine having on your diploma that you also have a Brookings minor in public policy if you're interested in graduate school, law school, business school, whatever your career plannings might be. It's a great opportunity. Other students just take the courses because they fit a requirement within their major, and they're a great course. As I like to tell students, here at UNLV, you have more access to Brookings Scholars than students at Georgetown or George Washington right in the Beltway. This is a unique opportunity for our students, and this is just the latest manifestation of how we're trying to integrate Brookings throughout the university. So I'm going to leave it at that. Again, there's more information about this on our website. We'll be happy to talk to you about it. We're going to bring up our scholars right now.
No, we're going to, a few more comments.
Oh, please.
And then
I'll let you do that.
You don't think I'd let you have the mic for very long. Okay. I was inside the Beltway of Virginia Tech, and I had no access to Brookings. I had to go there by myself, and my students were like, gee, it would be nice if we could get on the metro with you and go to Brookings. I was like, sorry. They're not going to let you in the door. They're not going to let you in the mothership. All kidding aside, no, it is unique access. I want to spend 2 more minutes on some of the stuff we're doing and a little bit of Futurecast. Then the scholars will come up, and they're in the room right now. There are 3 scholars that will come up and talk about engaging Brookings. And then we'll go to Q&A. We don't have a photo of the scene over at the Foundation building on UNLV's campus, but the first actual meeting of the Southern Nevada Caucus, which is about 3/4 of the legislature, because it's based on population, hails from our region. And apparently they had not really been talking with each other and strategizing about a set of deliverables for the region. They were, interestingly, ironically, they told us years ago we did when we were in the minority. We were pretty good at figuring out what we needed, including, for example, when we had the minority of regents, UNLV got bumped to equal status as the University of Nevada-Reno, because we were kind of scrappy. There's a great meeting, and it's online. You can download the Regents meeting notes from December of 1968. And somebody just busts a move, and all of a sudden we're co-equal. We're not Nevada State, which would have been applied that we were Aggie, they said. Great sort of strategy. They used to do that in the legislature. We used to be okay. And then we got so big that they said, well, what do we need to even worry about it for? We're so big. And then we got kind of worked. So the folks got together. We met for the first time at the Foundation building. The driver of this was actually the Chamber of Commerce. And they sought our council, Brookings Council, and Lindsay's council, for input to legislation. And you see some of the legislation mentioned here. I'll just highlight one. But even the economic development piece in the last cycle in 11 was critical, because that's the bill by which we redid all economic development in the state, and we were productive in sort of suggesting how that bill would be written. Take the transportation one, SB 322. This is interesting. So here's how NDOT, Nevada Department of Transportation, is organized. 7 members, 3 regions, Elko, Reno, Las Vegas. 1 vote each. That sounds fair. Because in 1917 they were equal. And then 4 other members, and this is weird because no other state does this. 4 constitutionally elected officers: the governor, lieutenant governor, the attorney general, and the controller. What's missing from those 4 is that typically they tend not to be transportation experts. They tend to be working on the rest of government. And in every other state, the governor is making the appointments. And, most governors are lawyers, most governors are folks out of business, and so on. They tend not to be, sort of in the weeds, if you will, on transportation policy. So here was our suggestion in working with the legislature. Why not make a proportionate board like the regions? And we said, how about 11? And 1 for every 250,000 residents in the state. 8 south, 2 north, 1 rural. Sounds fair. And they all have to be experts. And they all have to be vetted, and then out of a pool, the governor appoints. And so even it's so specific that a city the size of Henderson gets a single select and a recommendation. And it's moving through. It's gone through committee where it went throughout unanimously. It went through a fiscal note that got attached to it, which is usually a death knell, but the Regional Transportation Council down here said, hey, we'll pay that note. It's only $40,000 for extra meetings, and it could mean tens of millions of more dollars flowing to us. And here's why it's important. Right now, as we speak, they're building a beltway around Carson City. Literally a beltway around Carson City, a city of 50,000 people, a city that only has 7,500 commuters going up to Washoe County. When they're done with this whole fandango, the biggest bridge in the world over nothing at Galena Gorge. This thing could cost up to $1 billion for 7,500 commuters in a region that's losing population. Here we are. We have 200,000 commuters in Mojave County, Arizona. We've got this connection we'd like to make with Phoenix, the largest U.S. metro in the interior Southwest. A region that's changed its mind about trade with Mexico and wants to induce all kinds of logistics and trade flow with Mexico. And they want this freeway, of which they're willing to build 250 miles on their own, and they ask us just to do 11 or 12 or 13 miles. And it gets called a road to nowhere. Well, 821, guess what? I'm guessing that the 8 people that live in southern Nevada may look at that road differently. So if we get it through, I'm guessing that the conclusion of the Beltway around Carson City, which is well in progress, will proceed, but that the Beltway around Boulder, otherwise known as Interstate 11, otherwise known as the road to our 200,000 residents to the south that commute to us, otherwise known as the road to the 5 million people living in central Arizona who want trade with us, that'll get built as well. And that's drilling down and making these kinds of suggestions. So that's how deep we are in comparative regional analysis. And by the way, where did that idea come from? Arizona did it. The reason that we seem ready with all kinds of off-the-shelf ideas is we're actually taking the trouble to look at other states. And they've gone through similar reform. They used to be small states, now they're big states. They used to have, South Dakota's population. In 1940, Nevada was the smallest state. It was half the size, less than half the size of Wyoming. By 1960, we got lucky that Alaska entered the Union, or we'd been the smallest in 60. We were small in Hawaii. The point is that we now are not. We're an Iowa-sized state. We have as many electoral votes as they do. We're the size of Kansas and Mississippi. We need to start thinking at that scale. So future projects include that discussion I said previously about the Southwest Triangle, also the kind of idea and theme of us as a global city. And there's a lot of cooperation with Arizona and Utah about to start. One of the other regions we'll pick up is Southwest Utah was nearly in the commuter shed with us. Washington County. Now, there's talk about putting a toll in the Virgin River Gorge, which is part of Mojave County, that would cut us off at high expense because it's hard to maintain. We need to get the Arizonans thinking that we're responsible players, and if we don't toll 11, they won't toll 15. And they'll let trade flow freely through this region. But that's the kind of sort of fragile relationships we need. Right now, they see us as slightly erratic. And they let me know that, by the way, even this week, by yelling at me about what happens in our weird state. I say, you're weird too, you got your stuff. You're weird in a whole other way, but then you get a lot of crap done. And then we're kind of okay in that other way. We're sort of not the butt of national jokes. And then on the mechanical level, we don't seem to deliver. We need your competence at the sort of mechanical level, and you need to cool it out like we have on some of the hot button issues. And maybe we'll balance out in the West. This was just the last shot here of the future downtown in Las Vegas from the Star Trek Next Generation era. Thankfully, this is what it looks like instead. And this is just to illustrate that, from this period, we can't say what the middle of the 21st century will look like as far as this region. But there is a way to at least plan for some of the demands and the capacities that we see on the horizon. And with that, I'd like to invite up, Brad and David and Helen are going to come forward, right? And take the mic and talk. You want to do one at a time? Maybe you folks sit here, and then Helen, and then you, Brad. And all the bios are in the program.
Thanks, Rob. This on? Good. All right. My name is David Demore. I'm a faculty member over in the Department of Political Science. Rob and Bill reached out to me about 2.5 years ago now, I guess it was, for the conference they held in this room on political geography and demography of the Mountain West that resulted in the Swing Region book there. And then my relationship with Brookings was formalized, I guess, the following fall when I was offered a non-resident senior fellowship in the Governance Studies program. And my affiliation with Brookings and Brookings Mountain West has really sort of elevated the 3 elements that a faculty member is sort of judged on, and that is teaching, research, and of course service there. In terms of teaching, I created a course for the Brookings minor, taught it last spring, and we'll do it again in the fall. And the basic idea of the course is to look at the growing gap between electoral politics and policymaking. That is, the two don't complement each other, and they actually sort of work at cross purposes there. And so when I was bringing in the scholars here, they were able to sort of give the students a real overview of some of these key policy areas, and then we would sort of pose the question, now if you're a member of Congress spending all your time flying back and forth to your district and raising money, are you going to know these things? The answer was no. And I gave a good understanding of sort of the troubles we have there. And in particular, we had Alan Friedman out during the spring. Alan's an expert on cybersecurity, and this is at the point where they were discussing the PIPA and SOPA legislation. And he was able to explain this to me that I understood, and to my students. One of the students in particular was very interested in this, Melissa Dickinson, and he ended up helping her quite a bit on a project there, and that was very nice. Then we had Adele Morris out as well, who's a economist there and very interested in climate policy. Another student, Maria Zuniga, very, very engaged in that issue, and she was able to help Maria with some of the research and help her develop a really good end-of-the-term product there. Now, in terms of my research, obviously I contributed a chapter to the Swing Region book on redistricting in the Mountain West there. I'm also, Brookings Mountain West has sponsored a project that I'm working on with John Tooman, one of my colleagues, and one of our undergraduates, that's basically creating a demographic, political, and economic profile of Nevada's Latino community, which sort of dovetails with some of the work I do with Latino Decisions. And those papers will be coming out shortly. We have a couple of them that are being edited up, and the other ones will be put out into the early summer there. And then, of course, next week I'm also going back to the mothership, if you will, to participate in a roundtable on how we can use direct democracy as a tool for economic development, economic diversification. So I'm very excited about that. Now, in terms of my service, I do a lot of media work, particularly during campaign season here. But my work with Brookings has allowed me to engage the media and the community in probably a more sophisticated level than I was before. Probably many times more sophisticated than the media actually wants, but that's their issues. And it's also allowed me to, as Rob alluded to, be engaged with policymakers and decision makers in a way that a lot of academics aren't, and that's very, very exciting. Now, if we keep our fingers crossed, hopefully in the last month of the legislature, we'll end up with a couple of pieces of legislation coming out of Carson City that'll begin to make some significant governance reforms and begin to move Nevada and Southern Nevada into the 21st century and out of eventually the governance of the 1800s. And so I want to thank Bill and Rob for engaging me and letting me involved in these projects. Thanks.
Good morning. I'm Helen Neal from the School of Environmental and Public Affairs in the Greenspun College of Urban Affairs, and it's a real honor to be here today. I really want to thank Bill Brown, Rob Lang, President Samatrask, Bill Anthalis. Other people that I'd really like to thank also for being here is Tom Piota from the Office of Research, and certainly Dean Lee Bernick for the support that I've had to really, my experiences with Brookings Mountain West has truly been, in the true sense of the word, the term that the National Science Foundation uses of transformative. One of the reasons for this truly transformative experience in my professional development and career has really been the help and the support of Brookings Mountain West scholars such as Adele Morris. Adele, I first met in fall of 2009 when she came out to give a lecture on climate change and economics. And she came and gave a guest lecture for my environmental economics class, which was amazing. And it opened up a door to a whole new area of research for me, and also a friendship that we've been working on a paper on housing and energy economics. And I've had the pleasure of actually going to visit her at Brookings Institution twice now. She's hosted me not only at Brookings, she's also opened her home to me. And I've And over time, our families have become closer, our kids, our friends, and it's been, and the thing that I really want to say that Brookings Mountain West has helped me in my professional development in the following way. When I can remember back in high school, one of my favorite poems was a poem by John Donne, and the concept of no man is an island, I think, is really appropriate here and follows what Rob talked about earlier about how Las Vegas for years has been viewed as kind of an island. And but there are connections with other communities that we need to build upon. And my work with Brookings Mountain West scholars such as Adele has really given me an opportunity to recognize the opportunities associated with working together and learning from each other. And it has been transformative in my teaching, in my research, and even in my career as an administrator. There have been times where I can remember when I first came to UNLV, I was given the advice by a former dean in the College of Business that, Helen, in economics, you need to wear your hard hat and duck when full professors are shooting at each other. And and unfortunately, I think to a certain extent, I may have taken that advice a little bit too far. And one of the things that I've really enjoyed about my experience with Brookings Mountain West is getting my voice back and speaking up and talking about, what are some of the issues, what are some of the opportunities here in our community, both at UNLV and in Las Vegas. So thank you.
Well, I want to thank everybody for allowing me to say a few words. I want to thank Bill Antholis and Bill Brown and Rob. I got involved, my name is Brad Wimmer, I'm in the economics department. I got involved with Brookings, actually. I was asked to host the first Brookings scholar who came here. And I did a lot of, it seemed like a lot of work, and it was excellent experience. Had the gentleman, Cliff Winston, come out in the class and talk. And it became obvious that the Brookings scholars were interested in actually contributing to what we're trying to do here at UNLV. And what a great opportunity for an economist. My background a little bit, I worked at the FCC. I did a lot of public policy work. And you want to bring these things into class. And I'm limited. There's only so many things I can do. And having access to not only my colleagues here, but all the colleagues at Brookings to come in and to be able to give expert understanding of very serious policy issues. The students really, really enjoy it. And what we're able to do is we're able to provide them opportunities they wouldn't have had they not been here. And I think that's what we try to do. And Brookings has been so helpful in that. When after that meeting, I was actually teaching a master's level course we have on research methods. And so I worked with Bill, I worked with Steve Miller, my department chair at the time. And what we did is we set it up so Brookings scholars, we had I think 4 or 5 Brookings scholars in that first time. And really well received by the students. We had, I believe, Dr. Lovelace came in, talked about school choice, and a student I was working on a master's thesis, he was working on his master's thesis with me. He ended up doing school charters, and he used a lot of the material that Dr. Lovelace had brought in, and actually contacted him and talked with him. So I could start to see that we really had an opportunity here to really build something and take advantage of the opportunities that we'd been given. And so we continued to work with that, and then talked with Bill Brown. We started talking about what could we do in terms of curriculum in these things. And the Brookings minor came into being. And I was lucky enough to be able to teach that course and be involved. And shockingly, I was working with Adele Morris, who seems to work with everyone. And Adele has been fantastic. And I had an opportunity to go out and visit Adele here at these Brookings papers, which was a phenomenal experience in and of itself. But we talked about the course and how to teach the course and how we can actually bring economics alive by looking at policy issues on the national level, policy issues on the local level, and working with these people. And so it's a tremendous opportunity. And like I said, what we can do is we can now provide people opportunities they wouldn't have if they weren't involved with Brookings. And so what we did this year with Dr. Riddle, Jeff Wattups, and the whole department, we put together with Bill as well, the Brookings internship. And we had a little competition, and Matt Kinzer, who's actually a local, he was born in Las Vegas, undergraduate at UNLV. He's plans to go on to get a PhD in economics when he finishes here. And this summer he's going to be working with, again, shockingly, Adele Morris, working on climate issues. And he's going to go to DC for 3 weeks. And so what a fantastic opportunity for someone to be able to be in that environment and to do these things. And Brookings gives him that opportunity. There's also another story you talk about. They're just, Brookings, the scholars come out, they're not just excellent scholars, they're really good people. And they really want to fit in with the community. And they're just easy to work with. So there's a kind of a neat story. We have a student, Sarah Crown. Sarah is in our master's program. She's working on her master's thesis, UNLV graduate, economics. And Sarah became interested in the class Dr. Wattups, Jeff was teaching, in measuring the well-being, different measures of well-being besides looking at, excuse me, GDP and other measures like that. There's people who are working, specifically Carol Graham, who's a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution, working on issues of how do we measure well-being, how do we measure happiness, and what things, besides money, what things go into, well-being in these things. And so Jeff made sure that Sarah had a meeting with Dr. Graham. And Carol Graham is one of the, just like I said, just very engaging and so excellent with the students. And she immediately says, well, why don't you come out, right? Why don't you come out and meet the team? We'll work with you for some time. We'll get you access to some data, and you could write a great master's paper. So we worked on that, and Sarah's going to be going out, spending a couple of weeks at the Brookings Institution, working with one of the leading scholars in the world on an issue she's interested in. So, so when you look at what Brookings is able to do and what they're able to bring, and I'm just humbled to be a part of it. They made me a non-resident fellow here a couple of years ago. And, to be a part of an institution that's the #1 ranked think tank in the world, to be able to interact with people and talk to different scholars and, what's the market failure here? Is there government failure? How do we solve these problems? Because the problems don't have to be, and the issues don't have to be, it doesn't have to be a fight. It's about trying to find out what really is the issue. And so we had one of the students after going through the class, and he came up to talk to me after the class and said, we had the Brookings Scholars in, we worked on things, and he told me, he said, the biggest thing that we taught is you look at the theory and you look at data, and then you form your opinion. He said, I'd never done that before. I'd always formed my opinion and tried to find data that supported it, and it turns out my opinions weren't very good. So if that's what Rob Lang can do, and these are the things people can do, if we can get the discussion away from arguing about things and saying, what do the data say, what's good for the society, and if Brookings can contribute to that, I really appreciate it. So thank you.
Okay, we're right on time, and we left a section for Q&A. Where'd the mic go off to? Okay. So if you have a question, and it's for any of us, and Bill Antholis is still here, so he can answer questions as well. Take the mic and just say who you are. Questions? Over there. Oh, here we go. There you go.
Thank you, Ruben Garcia from the law school. I wanted to ask about the whole biotech possibility. I mean, I know that the med school, or I guess the med school possibility is also connected to that. But if you could talk a little bit about, what the short-term possibilities are for biotech and what's sort of necessary for growing that industry, and then I guess more of a long-term, I suppose, the medical school possibility.
Sure. I'll take that. I was in Phoenix the semester I was visiting faculty at ASU in the spring of 2006, and it's the spring that the city passed a bond to pay for the downtown redevelopment that included the med school, and they used everything, new market tax credits, philanthropy. It was a very innovative package they put together, but a lot of local money. And the whole discussion, and this is with the president, Michael Crow, got to Phoenix in 2002 and literally started saying every day, I want a med school, I want a med school. I want it, like a little bratty kid, they were like laughing at him. He was so, I want a med school, I want a med school. And he would say, why? And what it is that, first off, they were missing a lot of NIH money. You could look at what cities have NIH money, and it's a lot. The federal government is serious about medicine. It's not serious about a lot of things, but on medicine, it's serious. And that money flows to every region, a $500,000 or above, because they tend to, or $1 million or above, and they tend to have that kind of, a medical establishment in a biotech sector. And Phoenix was wiped out. It was, his fear was that it was 4 million people and some golf courses and a few retirees. And the whole idea, the whole way the business community framed the med school wasn't the med school for instruction, it was the med school for research. It was to induce a biotech sector, and they were very realistic about it. Again, the way the Phoenix folks approached it was, we're not going to be San Diego. We're not going to be the research triangle in North Carolina or central New Jersey. But if we don't get some of this economy, we miss one of the true growth areas of the US economy, and we're missing another engine of growth. So we're going to have to spend money on the public investment in a med school. And the med school meant a full med school, not instruction, but the three, clinical, research, and instruction. And the interesting thing is now, Phoenix is on its second med school, because ASU was an original partner in inviting a partnership with the University of Arizona from Tucson, but they created a whole separate med school. There are really two entities in Phoenix. And it triggered a biotech sector. In fact, the old Central High School, which is where the med school was rebuilt, was made, is blocks away from a corridor that includes the light rail that are a bunch of startup tech firms that were almost concurrent with that investment. And the reason is, without med school, there's no NIH. Without NIH, there's no research. Without research, there's no R&D. Without R&D, there's no translation into the private sector economy. It's that simple. It's A to B, B to C, and so on. And this is well known. It's not that it took Brookings or anybody with great insight to point this out. You just need the discipline, and you need to keep making the case in those terms. And so it looks like, Michael Crow was this pouting president who wanted another asset in place. No, he wasn't. He was a deadly serious fellow who realized that that entire region's economy was at risk, that their fortune and their lives were at risk. And he pushed for and leaned on, and he knew the state was useless. So he leaned on the municipality, and he figured out how to do it in an area that required redevelopment, that it could induce federal money for redevelopment, like the new market tax credits, which we'll talk about later as well, because those are available to us. There are ways to get there, and the reason you get there is that the benefit is bigger than UNLV or any school getting a med school. The benefit is that you get to play in a section of the economy that promises growth given the demographic profile of the United States, given the explosion of technology in medicine. The absence of that in any significant way in your region reduces the amount of economy, high-paying jobs, and regional growth you'll experience, period.
Yeah, let me jump in. The facts on the ground are really simple. We have been colonized for most of the medical school activities. We have created niche markets because we lack a robust medical school that offers all three components: clinical, research, and education. The education and research are up north. There's a bit of clinical down here. Why? Because they don't have enough people up there, so you have to send people down here. But there's a kind of a colonization-like mentality. We were ripe for invasion by what are called not-for-profit, but in fact are for-profit allied health establishments who are filling in niche markets because we've got cost controls that prevent market growth of our allied health professions. So what we'll see as the Northern Colleague Medical School clamors for a bigger footprint down here is that it's still a clinical footprint. It doesn't give us a healthcare supply chain. The biomedical research that we need, by the way, I'll just say Tom Piota and I and Tim Porter is here. We look at our people who come here. We've got some great hires we've made recently from Hopkins, who brought NIH funding with them. They're now having fun. They're the same researchers they were then, if not better. But they are having trouble maintaining NIH funding because it's not attached to a major area of biomedical research with a medical school. So we're feeling the impacts of that with our low NIH and our low level of biomedical research. Finally, there's a huge sector of the economy that I'd like to say if you can grow it in Scottsdale, you can certainly grow it here. And the Mayo Clinic, which is in Scottsdale, is a big draw. Here's another one, Houston. I lived in Texas for 23 years. Not the sun and fun capital of anywhere. All right? It is not a tourist mecca. It is not a great place, and the traffic's horrendous. But the Texas Medical Center is perhaps the largest on-the-ground collaboration of many medical institutions in the world, both in terms of physical kind of geography as well as in terms of total impact. When you've got MD Anderson, the DeBakey Institute, the list goes on and on and on. Because of that collection, driven heavily by heart and cancer treatment, and the access to phase 3 clinical trials research, it is now one of the hot spots for medical tourism in the country. You can drive huge amounts of business by giving people access to cutting-edge clinical treatments and phase 3 clinical trials. So we here, let me just tell you, you have a trip, you have a choice. You can go to Houston or you can come to Vegas. You're going to bring the family. Where are you going to go? Okay, if we can establish a large clinical trials presence here, whether it's with comprehensive cancer institutes, whether it's with the Cleveland Clinic and the Lou Ruvo Center, or a UNLV medical school supporting in a medical district, it will also support this dominant industry and give us a whole nother sector of our economy, while simultaneously, because of the clinical trials presence, building a lot of translational startup activity around that. So I got to tell you, we're pushing hard. I'm working right now with Jeff Cummings because there isn't another player who's any decent in town to work with, to be honest, on clinical trials. And what we want to do is build something called Adaptive Clinical Trials Design Research, which is a very lightweight but very potent group. Right now, the center of this is in Oklahoma, of all places. But these folks don't need big wet labs. They need computers and access to IT. We've got that in spades here, and that was a double entendre. And so what we need now is to bring these folks in, have them work hand in glove with everybody who's here, and really build that node. And that's one of the bridges that we can build a med school around. So yes, I'm too saying a med school, though I'm not supposed to say it out loud. But
others will say it for you.
For all the reasons that everyone else is citing, having a medical school here is actually a critical adjunct to our economic growth and ultimate prosperity. Sorry for the,
no.
You just pushed one of my hot buttons.
That was great. We'll get another question, and I'll just finish that too. As a region guy, I'm a specialist in how regions grow and how they connect. You can't usually build something at a 420,000 person metro like Reno and export it to Las Vegas. Reno can't fix Las Vegas. Reno can't fix Reno. And it's nothing personal. It's a mechanical issue. In other words, things scaled. Remember, Reno is the smallest city in the West with a med school. So when the University of Oregon decided to do a med school, Eugene was like, yeah, that's right, that's us. And they said, Portland. All right. And the med school's in Portland. Because they know that out of a small base, you won't develop robust clinical, you're at risk for even accreditation in terms of instruction. So Reno-sized things don't fix Vegas-sized problems, and that's a lot of stuff. That's not just medicine, but in medicine it's especially deadly because this isn't like Los Angeles extending capacity to us. And when Tucson really couldn't fix Phoenix, that's why there's a second med school. The lesson learned by Michael Crow is specific. Go to a world-class player if you're a world-class city, and they're willing to play if you create the context and the sort of infrastructure for them to enter the market.
Good morning, David Frelmer with Planning and Construction here at UNLV. It's really encouraging and heartening to see some movement towards equity in the state, although a long way to go, a very long way to go in terms of legislative and other affairs. It seems that the North has always had perhaps two things, history and organization over the South, but maybe not a whole lot more. And we've been they've been the beneficiaries of that. We have not. I guess one of my question is, what things do you see that can start to continue to move us towards equity in the future, and what things do you suggest that should be done that aren't being done that can help move that along and create a situation where there's investment in equity in the South as opposed to the South subsidizing everyone else in the state?
I'd say stay tuned, pardon me, for Lindsay, because what we commissioned under Lindsay is not political, but when you look at health and education and sectors like that, that's where you really see it. So, for example, you'll see a study that is just a teaser, because we're going to roll it out bigger in the fall, that shows, forget the state money, how are we doing with the federal government? Well, terribly. But interestingly, and this is really a sort of key point here, how's the North doing with the federal government? Pretty well. Here's how the federal government works on formula-based aid. How many people you got? Well, you know, you're not South Dakota. It looks like you got a couple of million people down in this big southern metro. So you're almost 1% of US population. So we're going to send you in these big categories nearly 1% for you to invest in your population as return flow from the federal government. So this is formula-based aid. It's not medicine for the elderly. It's not retirement. It's not aerospace. But it's the kind of stuff, roads, schools, health, the things that matter, the things that make a difference. And when you send it to Nevada, the North takes half. And so the numbers up north are not in deficit as ours are. In other words, they have a big nonprofit sector, you'll see. They have investment almost matching the US average per capita in their citizens, because they're not required to do one thing. You want to change it? Make some legislation that says if you get money from the federal government that is intended to connect to people, and it was packaged based on your population, then you have to forward it on to locality in the approximate proportion. And tens of millions of dollars will flow on us like manna from heaven. One fix. That's how drilled down we are. We're down to the language suggested in the legislation in the bill draft. And we'll take it from other states that have done it. In other words, we're not the only state that's seen this kind of back and forth. It's worse here than I've ever seen. But we're not alone. I've seen it. I lived in Virginia. The South was always, you know, oh, we're poor, help us, you know. But other states have taken the trouble to figure out that, especially on something like federal aid, if the federal government said you get it because you're this size, then it needs to go where the size is located. It needs to get forwarded on to that space. So, you know, I'm encouraged because I think that a whole generation of elected officials are actually getting this. The folks that David and I work with, and Bill works with, and the rest of the folks around here work with, they don't push back on this. They don't say, they say, how do we do it? How do we do it in a responsible way? How do we not wreck the North in the process? Let's show some decency. But let's do it. Let's get it done. And so things like governance, for example, the reason this is a bipartisan coalition is we never mention taxes. There's nothing in taxes about changing how you do road management. It's just road governance. You know, the question of what the federal government sends you and how it's distributed in the state is bipartisan. What Republican office holder in the South is going to say, no, the Northerners are more privileged than we are, and I believe they're entitled to a much larger share of the federal pass-through money. That's not a way to get reelected in either party. So the truth is that some of the most vocal voices that are with this fix are the Republicans. In fact, the shock to the state, they're sort of bubbling up, but most of the political commentary doesn't even quite get it, is that R and D are now in a lot of categories less relevant than N and S. So Michael Roberson is strongly supportive of changing the transportation structure. And he's in the, you know, the finance committee, and you see him, you could watch him on tape saying, hey, wait a minute. And then he gets pushback from the north. Well, the pendulum's going too far. No, it hasn't gone far enough. They'd like to say this to us. They'd like to say, maybe you dampen this down a little. Maybe you take, I don't know, maybe 3/5 of a person. We've tried that. That didn't work out so well. There was a civil war when we were 3/5 of a person. We are whole people. And our residents are whole people, and we need to connect those whole people to the whole money that's coming both through the state and federal government, because we got real problems and we got real critical issues that we face, and we don't want more than our share, we just want our share. Oh, we have time for one last quick question, if it's out there. Otherwise, I guess we're right on time, right? We're at 15? Break time. Come back for Lindsay. Cool, cool, cool stuff. Really out there research. Yes? One quick one.
John Brosco, Nevada Community Foundation. First of all, I'm thrilled to hear this. This is real thought leadership, so I'm really excited to be in the room with President Smatrisk and UNLV and Lindsay and Brookings. How much, as a relative newcomer, how much of a part of what you folks are talking about today is really in the public discourse? And if it's not, what's in place to sort of move that choreography forward?
I'll answer quickly. Big parts of it are. I'm actually, if you asked me, we're about 2 cycles ahead in the legislature than I would have guessed. Because sometimes things are like tipping points, you know, and they run away on you. And I'd say that, first off, in a leadership discussion, a lot of what we're talking about specifically is known. As far as the translation to the public discourse, it's not complete, but it's also something that's nascent and can grow. And I think you see it in some of the media discussion already. And again, the key point here is that it's almost like a DNA problem. You know, the other day, the governor was rolling out the state new brand, which I'm on record as not liking, A World Apart. Oh wait, I can't even remember it. It's A World Within a State Apart. We were trying to say the state was connected, by the way. But he said something about Nevada's DNA. The first thing I thought, Nevada's DNA is from somewhere else, with a population with the most. There are more Californian voters, and David knows this, in the state than there are native-born Nevadan voters. The one thing we have is we're from somewhere else. So it has taken a while. We're not but the North is far more locally born and identifies, you know, when you look at the bios of the northern region, so you look at the bios of the northern, multi-generation. We're just from somewhere else. Almost everybody in this room was born somewhere else. But we are here now, and we'd like to fix this thing. And that's the translation issue. You only need a mechanical process of creating that translation from the demographic power to political impact. And the whole drill down. And Lindsay's got devastating stuff on this. We commission things that zero exactly in on that. Because again, they're in these key areas like health and education. When we lay some of this out, the public discourse will change. Because you'll finally have the actual number mechanically. It's X versus Y. Right now, the benefit to the North has been this has all been fudged. They still even push back occasionally and say, actually, it turns out there was no difference. They do that. And then they get themselves in more trouble because finally somebody who's been sitting there taking it for a while, and I've seen this most recently in higher ed, Horn turns around and says, wait a minute, that's about it for me. I'm at a breaking point. And we're at a breaking point. So come back in a few minutes and we'll do Lindsay.